Jonty, welcome to the Health Path podcast. It's really nice to finally connect.
Great to be here, Alex. Thanks for having me.
So I was just saying off air how I kind of stumbled across your website when I was sort of doing some research, I guess, around internal family systems. And it really resonated partly because of your own journey with sort of chronic gut issues and chronic pain, and how you found, without wanting to put words in your mouth, I guess, the role that the mind played within your conditions. So that's kind of what I'd love to explore with you today. But before we dive into your kind of your story and your journey, are you happy just to do a short introduction into who you are and what you do?
Perfect. Yes. So again, thanks for having me. Really happy that you reached out. My name is Jonty, as you said so already. I call myself a chronic pain specialist. I help people who have all types of chronic pain, fibromyalgia, gut issues, back pain, neck pain, migraines. I've seen it all at this point. I help them get relief from their pain, and it's very rewarding what I do. I use a mixture of different methods. I use IFS therapy, which we'll get into today. I use a lot of mindfulness meditation. I also use a lot of self-care coaching. A lot of people come to me and they're not having fun in their life anymore. So I try and encourage them to start to have fun again, see their friends, pick up the guitar if they've put it down for years. Um, So, so yeah, that's me.
I love that. It's a key point already, actually. I would agree that just from my own experience of working with clients, there's often a fundamental lack of play and fun and laughter. Understandably so when you're struggling with chronic health issues, but as you say, it's kind of also a key part of healing is integrating back into some of those old hobbies and habits.
Majorly, you know. So, and this becomes something I realized in myself. Like you said, I'm going to get into it. We're going to get into it about my own story. My pain would never be there whenever I was having fun or, with my friends. And that it was a real light bulb moment for me to realize like what really is causing this pain, number one. And number two, maybe a solution to this, it does lie in me just enjoying my life again.
Mm,
So yeah, key component of my sessions.
amazing. So I got two things that come up. One is kind of whether we go into just highlighting IFS therapy, what you've mentioned there,
Mhm.
or whether we go into your journey. So do you have a sense of what would be the better order?
Journey first.
Okay.
Journey first. Yeah. Yeah, certainly because for your listeners, just for anyone involved, just to know that, it's a lot um, it's a lot easier for me to do what I do now because of what I've gone through. And I think it's nice that people can resonate with the fact that, oh, okay, this is something he went through. I fell into IFS therapy by accident, by complete accident. I had stomach pain. Is it okay if I just start? If I just go into it? I had terrible IBS, diagnosed when I was a teenager, so a long time ago. And I did what everyone does, changed my diet. I tried every diet imaginable. Some would work for a while. Then they kind of stopped working. I'd take foods out, I'd put foods in. It was back and forth like this for 10 years. And meanwhile, every now and then someone would suggest maybe there's some emotional components at play. And I'd hear that and it'd go in one ear, out the other. Like it would sit with me for a second, but it was scary to think it could be emotional because I didn't know which emotions.
Mm,
And I didn't know what to do if I did know which emotions they were. What do I do then? What's going on? Okay. So it was only until, and I freely mention this man often. Many people in the chronic pain world know who John Sarno is. It's only when I read Dr. Sarno's books did I go, oh my God, this is explaining me. All the personality traits he's explaining and the reasons why people with these personality traits have pain. It was amazing. Again, I said light bulb moment for me about 10 years ago. And I mentioned it. I was a yoga teacher and meditation teacher at the time. I mentioned it to my meditation teacher slash mentor. I said, I found this book. He says, my emotions could be creating pain. What do you know about this? I just spoke to him about it. He said, yeah, no, there's a lot of truth to that. meditation can help. And also, I do this thing called IFS therapy. Do you want to try it? Just complete accident.
Wow.
Yeah, let's do it. And of course, as many can attest to who have tried IFS therapy, even session one, straight away you think nothing's going to happen. Straight away you go, can't believe all of that happened. That was crazy. It's not, it becomes more and more vivid the more often you do it with visualizations and how in touch you are with your body. But from session one, I was crying and connected to a teenage part of me. And it became clear, oh my God, this has always been the source of my pain. Became clear pretty immediately. So, so that's my story. Another point I want to make is I think I mentioned briefly. I not only did I try every diet, I went and tried every treatment. I did wonderful treatments. I don't want to say these treatments and say that I don't think they're wonderful. Things like acupuncture and gastroenterologists and Reiki and cranio. You know, did everything. They're wonderful, and I met a lot of amazing practitioners. But it never really gave me the full scope of what was really going on until I got to IFS therapy.
Interesting. So I guess is this the opportunity just to kind of introduce a little bit of IFS?
Yeah, sure. So tell me again, you've had people that have spoken about IFS before on.
No, we haven't. I'm making an assumption that at least a percentage of our listeners have on a different podcast. But yeah, you were the first one on the Health Path podcast to talk about IFS.
What a privilege. Okay, great. Okay, good. So I'll give the very short what it stands for, just so people that don't know. IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. The theory goes that our minds are made up of lots of different subpersonalities, which we call parts. And these parts can be angry parts or sad parts. They could also represent different times throughout your life. So it could be a teenage part of you, or a 5-year-old part of you, a young adult part of you. And often, what we'll find with people with chronic pain is these parts are in conflict with one another in some way. In some way, they're disagreeing about how to live your life or how to compartmentalize emotion. So, an example often with parents is that they feel very loving and protective of their children, but also another part of them is a bit resentful of them being born. It's not something that they'll ever want to admit out loud, but they get a bit angry, like I haven't slept in ages. And there's a conflict there because as a parent, you don't want to experience your anger, right? You don't want to, you don't, at least I think you don't want to. You push that aside, that part aside, and you're like, no, I want to be the good parent. And what happens then unintentionally by pushing a part aside, an angry part, creates a conflict internally, and that can have an effect on the physical body. So my job as an IFS practitioner is to find these parts, these conflicted parts, and give the recipient an opportunity to let a bit of the anger towards their kid in. Maybe do it in a safe way and be like, it's understandable that this is here. That's the first part of how I want to describe IFS. The theory behind it is that the parts can be separated into different categories. We have protective parts and we have wounded parts. And we also have a self part. Okay. Have I spoken too much or can I go into all of these?
No, this is brilliant. Continue, please.
Okay. So the protective parts of our mental system are trying to protect us from the pain of the wounded parts of our system. Okay. So wounded parts of our system can be trauma or stress or abuse or neglect we experience usually as a child. Feelings of not feeling enough, maybe a specific moment that was where there was abuse or stress or something. Those are the wounded parts. They're called exiles in IFS. And when those traumatizing things happen in our life, immediately to prevent us from feeling overwhelmed by those emotions, we create these protective parts of our mental system. And the protectors, not to go into the specifics of, managers and firefighters, which maybe some of your listeners know, they'll do anything they can to protect you from feeling that wound again. And when I say anything, they may create pain in your body just to distract you from feeling those emotions. They may make you addicted to cleaning, make you addicted to alcohol, just to protect you from feeling those emotions. So by the time someone comes to me, my job is to identify the protectors, identify all the parts, identify the protectors, and teach recipients how to ask protectors that, hey, we can go to the wounded parts of us now. Like I know it was a really bad wound, and we think that we're going to be overwhelmed by these wounds, but actually, protector, you've done a great job. Maybe we're good enough, we're safe enough to now go to the wound and give that young part of our psyche all the things it didn't get at the time.
Mm.
Emotional support, someone to lean on, these kind of things. And once that agreement's been made, that's when the third part of the recipient's mental system gets accessed, the self part. And the self part is the part of all of us that's very caring and compassionate, confident, full of love, understanding, accepting. My job is to get people to access that self part and to do what's called a self part relationship, self to part relationship. So access this caring, loving part of you, turn towards your protective part and say, I've loved how you've protected us for years. But we're safe now. If you step aside, I think we can go to the wound. And the protector part may go, no, it's scary. And then you go, I know it's scary, but we'll be okay. Let's see what happens. Protector steps aside, take that same self part, turn towards the wounded part, the exiles. And this exile could be, again, a 5-year-old version of you that went through terrible stress. With that self part, you give that 5-year-old ideal parenting, is a good way I've been describing it recently to people. You let them cry on your shoulder. You tell them it's okay, you're feeling ashamed or disgusted or angry. You can experience all those emotions now. You're safe to do so. And what we find when we access our self part, we turn towards exiles or wounded parts. The protectors don't need to protect us anymore with pain. They don't need to protect us by being addicted to anything, you see? And it really can be as quick as that. You know, it often, I've simplified the whole process. Oftentimes there's some more complexity about protectors stepping aside and trusting stepping aside. Like, are you sure we're not going to get overwhelmed? And that could take time. Also with exiles, you show up for this, like, imagine a teenage version of you. You show up and you're like, I'm here for you now. And your teenager's like, no, you're not. You haven't been here for years. Why can I trust you now? So there's a bit more nuance there, but yeah, essentially the process is just about taking care of these parts of our system in a way that they hadn't been taken care of before.
Mm.
I hope that wasn't so complex.
No, I don't think I think that was perfect. And I think, the idea that some of those parts, especially the exiles, they're stuck in a historic time. They still think you're 5 years old, and that's why they're kind of still stuck there. I think it's such a powerful therapy ultimately, and it's really it blew my mind when I started sort of reading into it and having some therapy. And I think it can work in very subtle ways as well, some of those parts. um, I had an experience which was quite surprising to me, related to my grandma who passed away when I was 14. And there was a part of me that didn't get to say goodbye, and actually was really upset by that. And in therapy, I had an opportunity to not only speak to that part, but actually the therapist gave me an opportunity to speak to my grandma.
Mm.
And that was a really moving experience. And I think therapy, it can really enrich in that inner world ultimately, can't it?
Majorly, and it sounds beautiful what you went through, and and that's often something at first that just seems unapproachable to people. Like, I'm going to speak to a young part of me,
Mm.
a grandma in my mind,
Yeah,
and I mean, it happened for you, didn't it? And
and I mean,
came back, they were communicating back.
yeah, and it moved me to tears, and that's something I still I'm very happy crying in private now or with family around, but that was the first time in sort of a therapeutic setting where like something really clicked. And yeah, it was beautiful. And there was, I think the thing that I found with IFS is there was a physical feeling that shifts each time you start to integrate those parts. Like you can feel lighter, you can feel more compassionate, etc. And I think that's really powerful that they do those palpable shifts as you go through this process.
Mm. Yeah. So for you, you noticed, well, an outcome of it was the crying. You're able to cry more. Was that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely been a process, and like alongside IFS, there's been a lot of kind of breath work and other therapies as well. But also helped me just understand myself, like what you mentioned earlier. Like I have so many polarized parts. Like there's a part of me that wants to live in the middle of the forest by myself. There's a part of me that wants the penthouse apartment in the city, and like it just goes on and on. And it was so interesting to explore the sort of dynamic and where that was all coming from. Um, but sort of sitting down with those parts, there were times when my therapist would get me to sort of sit down and sort of visualize sitting with some of those parts. And for some reason, I was always drawn to sitting around a campfire with them, and being able to actually envision those parts, like their body language, what they dress like, their sort of mannerisms. It was a really powerful experience that I've just I've never come across before.
Yeah. Yeah. That's often what people say. That I was mostly what I'll get is people will open their eyes because it's done with the eyes closed, as you know. And I'll go, that was weird. That was weird, or that was wild, or whatever. I call it La La Land when people come out.
And I guess the funny thing is, like, it's a paradox in the sense because we all talk about our parts, don't we, at the same time? Like, it's such common language that we use, but we almost like we're not fully aware of what we mean when we're talking about our parts.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and you know, that's why Richard Schwartz, who created IFS therapy, that's why he called it parts, because he would notice his clients constantly saying a part of me this, a part of me that. So he started to call it parts, you know, which was very insightful and astute of him. Sometimes if people struggle with the notion of speaking to parts of themselves, I'll have different words to say to them. One thing I'll send them is a clip from the film Fight Club. Do you remember that film? Yeah. I don't know if your watchers and listeners know that film or like that film, but will I ruin it if someone hasn't watched the film? It's a great twist. There's a part of the film, there's a clip where the one character says to the other character, he says something along the lines of, "This isn't real what you're saying. I can't believe that this could have happened to me." And then the other character says, Brad Pitt, says people do it every day. They talk to themselves and they imagine themselves how they like to be. You just had the courage to run with it. And I love that film and I love that quote. Um, and that's what I tell people in their sessions. Every day we're talking to ourselves. Parts are saying this and that to one another. You right now are going to have the courage to turn inwards, run with it and see where it takes you. I promise you it's going to get you, you know, where you need to get to.
Yeah, it is incredibly powerful. I'm wondering, just for sort of certainly some of our customers listening who might be curious around this connection between, okay, so there are parts, we've got kind of these protectors and these exiles, and sometimes these protector parts might actually be creating something which we don't want, like pain, for example, or a condition. Ultimately, it could be a diagnosis. Are you able to kind of expand on that anymore, in regards to, yeah, I guess just helping people understand? Because I don't know whether it could be sometimes taken, if it's not explained well, that we're kind of saying, well, I guess there has to be compassion that comes with this, because in one way we are saying we're creating our health situation, but unintentionally, ultimately. And that's where I guess those seven C's of IFS, the compassion, the curiosity, etc., are so important to bring into that kind of conversation with ourselves.
You hit the nail on the head there. It's unknowingly. It's all unintentional. You know, one of the reasons why pain can get created in the body is repressing emotions, which is different to suppressing. Suppressing is something we're doing consciously. Repressing is unconsciously. A lot of people, including myself, when I first got into IFS therapy, I didn't know I had a lot of anger that I was bearing. By the time I got there, sure, it was scary to be with that amount of anger, but with the help of the IFS therapist, I was able to see it. I was able to see the mechanism, why the anger was there, what it needed from me. And I was able to finally allow the presence of it. And only by doing so did there no longer need to be pain, almost like, this is it's not a debate in the chronic pain world, but John Sarno, who I mentioned before, he would speak about pain being a distraction mechanism, trying to take you away from feeling an emotion. I don't speak about it like that. I say it's a guiding mechanism. The pain has been there to help you. It's been trying to say, hey, you need to learn how to be with this anger.
Mm.
And I promise you, once you get there, you'll be fine. You know, the 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 thing I often tell people, they're not quite ready to hear at first that their pain is working for them. And I really understand that. When I was in tremendous amounts of pain, I would have told people, I would have said, no, it's not. It's ruined my life. They're not quite ready to hear that, but when you take them inside and you realize the mechanisms behind why pain maybe was created, they start to cultivate more empathy.
Mm.
Yeah, there's more understanding of the situation pretty soon in. So yeah, but like I said, you hit the nail on the head. It's unintentional, so they don't realize they're doing it. It's
Mm.
not we don't learn emotional intelligence at school. We don't learn how to be in relationships. We don't learn how to be parents. We just expected, you guys, you're over 18, I'll go and mess up your life. Pretty much. Go and just and I understand that wisdom is something that we all have to kind of cultivate through age, and it's going to happen. But it's a separate topic. Maybe it'd be nice if we could give people a bit more, you know, of a basis, a foundation, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Katie and I are at that point in our lives where we're sort of opening up discussions around education for our kids, and do we homeschool? What do we think about the educational system at the moment? And it's a really sort of hard one, but I think, as you say, there's so much lacking within the educational system that is essential to thrive as an adult, as a human. There is that strong appeal to kind of take a little bit more ownership over how we raise our children ultimately. Um, but I can see how IFS, going back to these parts and things, I can see how it can show up maybe through, and then correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess sort of self-sabotaging type behaviors. And, you know, we're in the new year, lots of us have New Year's resolutions. A lot of us 3 months down the line might be fading with that New Year's resolution. I mean, I guess sometimes even our parts are having a role to play within that.
Within self-sabotage,
Yeah.
massively. There's a concept in IFS called blending. And are you aware of blending?
I remember being told about blending, but I can't quite remember what it is.
So essentially what it means is when we are acting through a part, so we're blended with a part.
Okay.
So when we fully start to practice and really utilize IFS ourselves, we begin to realize that this critic that's been in our head the whole time isn't criticizing us. It's criticizing another part of us. The part that's self-sabotaging isn't trying to self-sabotage our life. It's doing it because it fears success. It fears the scrutiny, maybe that comes from success. It fears failure. And it's maybe because at some point when we failed at something, we were scrutinized. Maybe it was bad to fail. Maybe mum didn't love us or dad didn't love us when we didn't do well on a test, something like that. So we create this mechanism, this self-sabotage mechanism, to protect us from feeling the pain of being rejected from mum and dad again. And where blended comes into this is unbeknownst to us, if we haven't done IFS therapy, gets to the new year, and we just find we're self-sabotaging. We're blended with, let's say we created the self-sabotage part of us when we were 15. We're blended with that part 15-year-old. We're blended with that protective mechanism we created to not get rejected by mum and dad.
Yeah, it goes so deep. I think this is what fascinates me so much. I remember being at a conference years ago now, but the presenter was sharing a kind of a story along these lines whereby she worked with a client around weight loss and they were successful in losing the weight. And she bumped into her client at a drinks party, I think maybe let's say a couple of years later. And the old client said, I wish I'd never come and seen you. And to kind of cut the story short, or shorter, the person had been sexually abused when she was younger. And the excess sort of weight was a protective mechanism. You know, her sort of words, she's learned to understand that actually it was a way for her to feel safe because in her eyes, if she was overweight, she would be less attractive and therefore she wasn't at risk of being sexually abused again. So I have occasionally shared that with clients when I felt it was appropriate, just to kind of demonstrate how sometimes our health is sort of, it's deeply embedded in our history and the things that have happened to us over our lifetimes ultimately. And that's why I love kind of IFS and trying to getting you on to kind of share it with the level of detail that you can, because a lot of people I've spoken with over the years, I mentioned this before we started recording, they like you, they've done the diets, they've done the protocols, but they are still trying the next diet and the next supplement protocol. And I think, after let's just say 6 months of trying to heal the gut through a gut-centric perspective, a gut-centric route, if it hasn't worked, I think that's the time to start thinking, okay, well, what else could be preventing those things from working? Because normally they can work. So that's always the way I frame it. Like, you've done that stuff. Now we need to open up another avenue to explore what's blocking you from being just a healthy, vibrant human. Um, and I think IFS is a really great tool and system to understand ourselves. So yeah, I'm the biggest advertiser of IFS ultimately, I think.
I love that. I love how you approach that. It's not about telling people they shouldn't eat healthy or continue to eat healthy or, concentrate on their sleep or exercise. It's about, there's more to health than the physical. And you may have heard or even used the concept of the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual health, the four components.
Yeah.
It's not about neglecting the physical and then only doing emotional, mental. It's about how can we do all four? Often the point is we're overly relying on the physical, aren't we?
Yeah, I think we are definitely. And I think, the weird thing for me is that our relationship to food, to exercise, to self-care is so in our emotional, mental, spiritual realm. So we're trying to help ourselves and heal ourselves through something, but ultimately, how we're relating to that thing is often part of the problem. So that's kind of where I'm at these days. I'm really curious about people's relationship to exercise or food, and often that's where the magic is ultimately.
I've just finished putting together an online program, and it's exactly when I start to speak about diet and exercise, it's the approach. I was obsessed. I was obsessed with diet and exercise, and that's what needed a change. And in the one lecture that I give, I say that when I was in pain, I was obsessed with how I was eating, what I wasn't eating, etc. I was obsessed with how I was moving. I was doing yoga 4 or 5 times a week and working out and all kinds of things. Now I have no pain and I'll eat pizza. I work out like once or twice a week. I'm not saying don't work out a lot if you don't want to, but I'm not obsessed with these things anymore. I do them because I know it's part of a healthy lifestyle, but
Yeah.
excessive.
Yeah, and just to share one more personal thing around this in case it's helpful for someone, because I'm sure it will be. Um, my mum, bless her, she bought some food round after Barnaby was born just to kind of help us out. And one of the things she brought us, she knows her son's a nutritional therapist, and she brought round this huge Marks and Spencer's sticky toffee pudding. And I ate it. I ate it. but I had this, I don't know why, but I had this moment during it where I was like, oh my God, I have for years um sort of unconsciously reduced the amount of pleasure I will get from certain foods.
Mm.
Because there is whatever their guilt, shame, a part of me which says you shouldn't be eating this and therefore you can't enjoy it. But that whole process, that whole story is what I think led me to react to some of those foods in the first place. And I just had that moment of I'm not actually allowing myself to enjoy this delicious pudding. And that's what's driving or used to drive some of the food reactivities that I had. And how where else in life am I holding back pleasure? It was really quite a enlightening experience.
And then did you eat the pudding or had
Oh
some?
yeah, yeah. And from that moment, I was like, even how I was taking it off the spoon was like, that's not someone that's like really enjoying this pudding. So I like in really subtle ways, it was kind of manifesting. So I kind of just took a moment and was like, no, no, if you're going to eat it, enjoy it. Um, and yeah, I mean that's me now. That's still that kind of stuff still going on.
Oh, that doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I've still got parts of me that freak out if I even see gluten. I was there, but sounds like you have a lot more self-awareness and you're able to let that part know. I get that you're scared, but we'll be okay, right? Yeah.
And I think I guess it's in one of the IFS books, I think, talking about, you've mentioned the self and how when we're embodied in that self energy, that's when we're going to be compassionate and curious to these parts. So it's almost like a barometer of how in self am I during this podcast, during a therapy session, whatever it may be. Um, and I guess that's a key variable that sometimes has to be kind of cultivated itself. Am I right in saying like that capacity to actually get into self so you can hold the space, so to speak, for this dynamic to unfold?
For me or for the recipient?
I
Both.
guess for both ultimately.
Yeah, that was going to be the thing. Definitely for me to be in self. And my job is to try and teach them how to access self themselves. At the end of the day, I'm a teacher. It is about take this into the everyday moments of your life now. And how can you cultivate self more often? There's a great book by Richard Schwartz called No Bad Parts. And he says a lot in that book. I really recommend it. But the premise of No Bad Parts is whether it's a protective part or a wounded part, it's not, nothing's bad. And the protective parts, like we've mentioned so far, we've mentioned a critic, it can be a self-sabotage part. These are all protective parts. It can be, name something else that's bad. A part that's catastrophizing, a part that's freaking out over sticky toffee pudding. You know, if we're for the person that's unaware of parts work, they maybe will fear their inner critic or they'll fear the self-sabotage part of them. They go to war with it. But someone that's done a bit of IFS, they've learned how to access self-energy. They can look at their self-sabotage part and go, I get why you're doing this. I understand why you're here. It makes complete sense because of all that stuff that happened when we were younger. You've created this mechanism, but we're going to be okay now. We can, keep using your example. We can eat the pudding, you know. So yes, teaching people how to access self-energy, major, major. Meditate. One thing I want to say, meditate. Mindfulness meditation has been somewhat teaching this for millennia. I mean, trying to at least. It was difficult maybe for us to hear it with Western ears.
Mm,
But what's so wonderful about IFS therapy is it's created a therapeutic modality out of mindfulness meditation.
right.
All the principles that they cross over. One of the many, or I think one of the most important principles of mindfulness meditation is you can allow contradictory emotions to exist at the same time. And that's a major part of IFS therapy. We said straight from the beginning. You can let yourself feel really guilty and really angry and really happy about the same thing. They can all coexist.
Mm,
Yet none of them have to define you. They're just parts. Um, so the crossover is wonderful.
yeah, that's interesting. It's almost given it a modern day infrastructure kind of thing.
Pretty
Um,
much.
just a question that I guess comes from my own experience with IFS. I'm curious if it's I guess a common observation, which is when a part comes online, my the tone of my voice like might drastically change.
Mm.
And I remember, I think it was like my second IFS therapy session. My therapist was like, Alex, I'm just noticing like the tone of your voice and your body language. I'm wondering if that really rational, logical part is around right now. And it was so interesting to have that observation fed back to be like, oh my God, yeah, I can really feel that actually. And it was just a really powerful, yeah, I guess feedback that, oh, actually I can even listen to my voice and my tone to understand where I'm at to some degree.
You can, you can. Parts will speak in different languages. I don't mean foreign languages. I mean they'll speak in a different tone of the voice. They'll speak in our body language. And when our eyes are closed and we're accessing parts, we may see them, we may actually see them as visuals. We may see them as former versions of ourselves. We may see them as characters. I've had people say, there's a bunny rabbit here, now there's a clown, now there's a big dragon, and it represents usually people in their life. Parts may not talk at all, particularly young parts. It may all just be felt through the body. I'm feeling that this person is sad, and I'm feeling that as like a bit of hollowness in my chest or in my gut. So using IFS therapy, you begin to learn the language that your parts are using. A common one being maybe the tone of your voice changes or your body starts to, as a practitioner, I've got to watch people. It's very rare that they're just there completely calm. They'll usually get there once they've got a lot of self energy and they're having a really beautiful moment with a part. They settle. But yeah, often something will happen, or they'll reenact what happened at the time. They'll notice their body will start to shift in that way. It's super fascinating, really. The idea that these things happen in some like version of the past are still dictating our life in the present day.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like within us there is like a a part for sort of almost every moment of our entire life. Like there's just like a tiny Alex going back and back and back. And you can kind of, potentially connect with all of them. And some are, as you say, protectors, exiles. But it just really feels like that's the case. It's really, I just can't recommend it enough if people haven't tried it. Um, Even if you don't have obviously chronic pain or IBS type issues, just to sort of get to know yourself and or your parts better. It's a really powerful thing. Is there anything we haven't touched on, Jonty, that you think would be helpful or important to sort of get across?
With IFS therapy or with winter in England?
With IFS therapy and your journey, or anything else that you'd just like to share with our listeners, I guess.
I'd say really, what's interesting with IFS therapy, anyone that is using IFS therapy now, they'll understand that parts can speak through pain. Um, I'd like to see more people specializing in it though. So maybe this is a call more for practitioners,
Mhm.
more for the listeners, because so many people are going through pain. I mean, IFS is predominantly used for people that aren't maybe in chronic pain. They just need help with feeling stuck in life, or it can help with anything. It's a therapy like any other. But chronic pain is such a massive amount of people suffering with it. And IFS therapy is such an amazing tool to get people through. So if someone's listening and they're considering IFS therapy, or they've had chronic pain or work with people with chronic pain, I'd love to see more practitioners specializing in it, because not only because I've got so many people coming through, I'd love to be able to talk to someone about it. I'd love to be able to share knowledge with one another, with other practitioners about it. Yeah, that's a call for practitioners. I'm trying to think. Did you have any questions about that, or can I?
Um, No, just that I watched a fibromyalgia webinar recently, and I'm sure the statistic he shared was I can't was it something like it was something crazy like 15% of the population have a pain-based condition or something. I just remember like my jaw dropping at the statistic.
You know, the NHS website. I don't, are most of the listeners here from the UK?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the NHS website, it used to state something called medically unexplained symptoms. You can still see that on the website. And it used to say it affects 45% of visits to the GP.
Wow.
Medically unexplained. They since changed the stat, I believe, to 1 in 4, which is a drastic improvement. I don't know how it suddenly improved. I don't know where they're getting their stats from, but I certainly know from knowing people who are GPs who are now in the chronic pain mind body space, saying it's a tremendous amount of people that come to see them. You know, there's as I can sound like I can hear you are as well. I'm quite careful with suggesting people need to stop using physical modalities or surgery or medication, etc. I'm like, no, if you need that, then that's fine. One doctor stood up in this one conference I went to, David Hanscom, I think he was, amazing man. And he stood up and he said, probiotics don't work. It's a big con. And everyone kind of gasped. And he's been a GP for however many decades. And he was quite frank. He said, no. He said, no. He called it big health. He said, they're taking advantage of a lot of people. It's got so much more to do with, all the things that I've spoken about, emotional repression and stress from the past. Um, I maybe wouldn't, or maybe I'm not as frank as he is. I mean, I haven't got the same experience as he has, but I think I'm a bit more middle ground about things. But it was interesting to hear that perspective
Yeah.
shared.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a fascinating one, and I think the whole. I think healing in the experience it's just full of paradox ultimately, isn't it? And I think that's what when you start to explore it, it can be scary because, as you've said, sometimes it could be scary because you're scared about what's going to come up and whether you can manage the emotions or whatever it may be. But also, just, I think sometimes when you're going through transformation, it can be quite destabilizing as well. Some of those behaviors and habits that have been serving a purpose. Um, what do you do without them? How will you be without them? What do you replace them with, etc.? How does that impact your relationships that you're in, and all these sorts of things? So I think having a therapist who can kind of be in self and hold the space and sort of guide you through it is such a key process of it as well.
Yeah, and I like what you said earlier, and I really share your opinion about our approach to things that needs to shift. When I was struggling with tremendous amounts of pain, I became really, insistent. I need to go to bed at this time because I need to get sleep between these hours and this kind of thing. The IFS therapist, amazing man who I eventually started seeing one-on-one, he was a lot more accepting of what maybe classical health recommendations wouldn't be accepting of. Like if you want to have a snack at 1 in the morning, have a snack at 1 in the morning. Like it's more your resistance and fear of that's going to cause issues. If you can just kind of go about your life a bit more seamlessly, try and stick to health principles. But if you need to snack at 1 in the morning, snack at 1 in the morning. Like try not to, but if you do, just have a giggle about it. That approach to life, like happy, smiling, fat Buddha, is you'll be healthier. You'll be
Yeah.
healthier in the long run. And I think back to you asking if there's anything else I'd like to share. I've been thinking about that in the background while obviously listening. Um, because I sometimes when IFS therapy or any therapeutic modality gets spoken about, maybe for a listener it can all feel a bit complex, and we're mentioning parts and what does this mean? Am I blended, or what are all these terms meaning? And I really want people who haven't tried it yet to know that it's really best experienced to understand it. Like I can talk about the theory for ages. I mean, there's tremendous books that do a lot better job than I do. But when you experience it, you really begin to understand what's going on inside. And like I said earlier, session one, you'll get it. You'll go, oh my God, here's all these things I'm doing. And I've always been doing it. So I really just want anyone listening who's thinking of trying it to know, just try it. Just experience it, all the theory, maybe put it aside to a second and just see what happens.
Mm. Yeah, it's good advice, I think.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like I had one question that I wanted to ask. I think it's gone. I'll see if it comes back as I start to wrap up. But Jonty, it's been a real pleasure. I think you've done an amazing job of breaking down IFS and sharing with our listeners. And I think it will resonate with a lot of people. I think there's something about IFS that often, as you say, especially if you just experience it even a little bit, you just go, huh, this makes so much sense now, over sometimes little things or sometimes big things. But I certainly, it's helped me, it's given me a tool, I think, because it's very practical ultimately, isn't it? At the same time, although there is lots of theory there, there's also, once you get the basics, you can just run with it to some degree. When you're in a dialogue, you can start to think about the parts and what's going on. And I've just found it really helpful to navigate some of that stuff in my day to day as well.
Yeah. This is really what the sessions are for. Awakening the ordinary moments of life. There's a
Mm.
great, if someone isn't ready to do sessions, there's a great IFS self-therapy book as well. I can't recall the author's name. If you just type in IFS self-therapy into Google, you'll see it. And that book's wonderful also, and you can start to learn how to do these things yourself, have your light bulb moments yourself. I mean, my first light bulb moment was noticing that I don't have to fear my inner critic. It's just a protector that thinks I needed to be perfect in order to get love. That was its spiel. Um, and no longer going to war with that was a major revelation. You know, I was in the yoga industry and we do something there called spiritual bypassing. You've heard of this phrase? Yeah. Yeah. And the thing about spiritual bypassing, maybe for any listeners that don't know it, is uh, everyone learns about it and then thinks they're not doing it. I'm not bypassing. It's like when I lived in Argentina and everyone says everyone's a bad driver. And I said, who's the bad drivers if everyone's saying they're the bad drivers anyway? It's the same with spiritual bypassing. It's when you bypass letting yourself feel emotions because you think it makes you a good person by doing so. So if you hear yourself judging someone or you hear yourself criticizing or comparing yourself, you go away. I'm a spiritual person now. I can't let myself feel these things. I can't be angry.
Yeah.
And IFS therapy made me realize I was spiritually bypassing and what to do about it.
Mm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Jonty, thank you so much. I feel like we could just talk for another hour on this topic. It's always the way when you've got two people passionate about something, I guess, ultimately. But where can people find you if people want to just reach out, if they're interested in maybe working with you or just learning more about your work? You've mentioned an online program, I think, that you're finishing off creating. So where's the best place for people to find you?
It's my website, jontyhikmet.com. Very simple. I see people one-on-one, and I finished an online program because the one-on-one became a bit inundated. That's why I'm trying to get more IFS therapists to do chronic pain because a lot of people need help. So I wanted more people to have access to a lot of the lessons. So I've created a self-paced course. It's a hybrid. You'll still get to see me intermittently, but mostly it's self-paced. And the good thing about that course compared to the one-on-one program is there's no waiting list. The one-on-one thing, I can't see anyone maybe for a couple of weeks or months at a time. With the online program, you can jump on a call with me and start it straight away. So if someone wants to find out more about any of this, go to the website. You can book a free call with me,
Amazing.
have a chat. There's no obligation to buy anything afterwards. I'll give you some options. I'll tell you to read some books if I think that's the best thing for you. But yeah, that's the best place. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I've really, as someone that's very like an IFS groupie, I really want to know about your system, like your mental system. You dribs and drabs, and I've been like, curious to ask you questions about it, but I know that's not the nature of the podcast.
Well, I'm more than happy to. I'm an open book to some degree. Jonty, I'll put those links into the show notes so people will be able to access kind of your website and very easily. I'll mention and put those books that you've mentioned as well into the show notes, so everyone will get easy access. But thank you for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Alex.